A man worth billions, disguised as a nobody, sits in a restaurant he secretly owns. He orders the most expensive steak on the menu, a quiet test for the staff. But it's the waitress who tests him. She's quiet, efficient, and looks worn down by the world. As she clears his plate, she performs a simple, almost invisible action. She leaves behind a folded note. It's a tiny piece of paper that will unravel a multi-million-dollar conspiracy, expose a devastating betrayal, and put both of their lives in mortal danger. What could she possibly have written that would stop a titan of industry cold? The smell of money and seared beef hung heavy in the air at the Gilded Steer, the flagship steakhouse of the Grand Atlas Hotel in downtown Chicago. It was an aroma Connor Brennan knew well. He had curated it, from the specific blend of mesquite and applewood used in the grill to the absurdly expensive air filtration system that ensured the scent was enticing, not overwhelming. Tonight, however, he smelled nothing but decay. It wasn't a literal smell. It was a feeling, a creeping rot he sensed at the edges of his vast empire. Brennan Holdings. It was in the quarterly reports that felt a little too perfect, in the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room, in the way certain executives suddenly avoided his gaze. So, he had shed his identity like a snake sheds its skin. The hand-stitched Brioni suit was replaced by a worn Carhartt jacket, the Patek Philippe with a cheap Timex, and the confident stride of a CEO with the weary shuffle of Cal, a laid-off construction worker nursing a bad knee and a small severance payout. His disguise was meticulous. A few days of stubble, a dusting of drywall powder in his hair he'd applied in the men's room, and the profound, bone-deep exhaustion he didn't have to fake. Being Connor Brennan was a heavier weight than any bag of concrete. He'd chosen the Gilded Steer for a reason. It was his crown jewel, a place where perfection was the minimum standard. If the rot was anywhere, the infection would show here. He watched the staff. The maître d', a man named Jeffrey, had given him a look of thinly veiled disdain before seating him at a small, undesirable table near the kitchen doors. Perfect. The busboys moved with frantic energy, avoiding eye contact. The clientele, his city's elite, laughed and made deals, oblivious to the wolf in sheep's clothing sitting in their midst. Then he saw her. Her name tag read, Leora. She moved with a practiced economy of motion that spoke of years in the service industry. There were faint, dark circles under her eyes, but her posture was straight, her uniform immaculate. She wasn't fawning like the other servers, nor was she dismissive. She was a ghost, a professional, present only when needed. When she approached his table, her voice was low and even. "Are you ready to order, sir?" Connor, as Cal, grunted and looked at the menu he'd been studying. He knew its contents by heart. He had approved every dish. He pointed a calloused finger at the star attraction. "Yeah, I'll have the Emperor's cut. The big one. Medium rare." Leora's eyes flickered, just for a second. It was a $250 steak, a prime 48-ounce porterhouse aged for 60 days. It was a celebratory dish, an expense account indulgence. It was not a dish for a man who looked like he counted every dollar. She didn't question it, didn't raise an eyebrow. She simply nodded. "An excellent choice. And to drink?" "Just a water. No ice." "Of course, sir." She turned and glided away. Connor watched her go. Most servers would have tried to upsell him on a wine pairing, or at the very least, made a subtle joke about the order. Her lack of reaction was, in itself, a reaction. It was professional, but also cold. It was the reaction of someone who has seen it all and is no longer surprised by the strange, sad ways people spend their money. For the next hour, he observed, he watched her handle a demanding couple at a nearby table with unflappable grace. He saw her share a brief, worried glance with a young busboy who had almost dropped a tray of glasses. She moved through the controlled chaos of the restaurant like a navigator in a storm, calm and focused. There was a strength in her, a quiet resilience that felt out of place amongst the manufactured opulence. The steak arrived. It was magnificent, a testament to his own exacting standards. Leora placed it before him with a quiet reverence. "Enjoy your meal, sir." He ate slowly, methodically. The meat was perfect, melting in his mouth with a rich, buttery flavor. But his appetite was gone. The performance of being Cal was grating on him. This test felt hollow. All he had learned was that his maitre d' was a snob, and his chefs were still brilliant. The rot he was looking for remained hidden, lurking beneath the polished surface. He finished half the steak and pushed the plate away, a gesture of extravagant waste that suited his character. He signaled for the check. Leora arrived promptly, the bill discreetly tucked into a leather folio. "Will that be all for you, sir?" "Yeah, that's it," he mumbled, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He deliberately fumbled with the cash, making it look like he was counting out his last dollars to cover the exorbitant meal. He laid out the bills, enough for the check, and a meager, almost insulting 10% tip. Leora picked up the folio. Her movements were swift and sure. As she turned, she placed his water glass back on the coaster it had been sitting beside. A simple, tidy gesture. But her fingers brushed the side of his hand as she pulled away. It was a fleeting, cool touch. He thought nothing of it. She walked away without a backward glance. Connor sat for a moment longer, feeling a fresh wave of dissatisfaction. The experiment was a failure. He prepared to leave, to reassume the mantle of his life, no closer to the truth than he was before. He reached for the water glass to take a final sip. That's when he saw it. Underneath the glass, where the coaster had been, was a small, tightly folded piece of a napkin. It hadn't been there before. She had placed the glass on top of it, a perfect, invisible drop. His heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. This was it. This was the anomaly. His eyes scanned the restaurant. Leora was nowhere in sight. She had vanished into the bustling ecosystem of the kitchen. With a hand that trembled slightly, he picked up the folded napkin. He kept his movements small, shielded by the table and his own body. He carefully unfolded the paper under the table's edge. The message was written in neat, block letters, penned with a simple ballpoint. There were only 9 words. "They know who you are. Nightingale is a lie." Connor Brennan froze. The air in his lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just the first sentence that chilled him to the bone, the impossible fact that his cover was blown. It was the second. Nightingale. Project Nightingale was his most guarded secret. It wasn't a corporate venture. It was a deeply personal, multi-billion-dollar philanthropic foundation he was building in his late mother's name, designed to revolutionize pediatric healthcare. It was known only to his inner circle, his most trusted board members, and his COO, Gavin Reed, the man who had been his best friend since college. And this waitress, this ghost with tired eyes, knew its name, and she was telling him it was a lie. In that instant, the entire gilded world of Connor Brennan shattered. The drive from downtown Chicago to his secluded Lake Forest estate was a blur. Connor didn't remember the traffic or the winding roads. His mind was a maelstrom, replaying the moment over and over. The cool brush of Leora's fingers, the stark black ink on the cheap napkin, the 2 impossible sentences that had detonated his reality. He stormed into his mansion, the Cal persona discarded like a cheap costume at the door. The cavernous, minimalist space, usually a source of calm, felt oppressive and menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. He bypassed the grand staircase and headed straight for the sublevel, to the secure room he called the Sanctum. It was a technological fortress, shielded from any form of electronic surveillance. Inside, a single man sat surrounded by a bank of monitors, his face illuminated by cascading lines of code. This was Frank Miller, the head of Brennan Holdings Security, an ex-Delta Force operative with a mind like a steel trap. Frank was the one person on Earth Connor trusted without reservation. Frank looked up, his weathered face showing surprise. "Connor, you're back early. How was dinner theater?" "Cut the crap, Frank," Connor snapped, his voice rough. He smoothed the napkin out on the desk under a harsh task light. "Run a ghost search, now." Frank's demeanor changed instantly. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and analytical, as he read the note. He looked from the napkin to Connor's pale, grim face. "Who gave you this?" "A waitress, the Gilded Steer. Her name tag said Leora." Frank didn't ask another question. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. Tapping into the hotel's employee database. Vera, Leora Vera. Clocked in at 4 p.m. Clocked out for an unscheduled family emergency at 8:52 p.m., 6 minutes after dropping your check. She's running, Connor muttered, pacing the length of the room. She knew I'd read it, and she ran. Facial recognition is a match, Frank said, as an employee ID photo flashed on the main screen. It was her. The same tired eyes, the same stoic expression, but younger, without the soul-crushing exhaustion of a double shift. Leora Vera, age 28, U.S. citizen, born in St. Petersburg, Russia. Emigrated at age 10. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Lives in a walk-up in Pilsen. Pays her rent on time. Works 2 jobs, the steer and a morning shift at a diner in Little Village. She's a ghost, Connor said. A nobody, so how the hell does she know about Nightingale? That's the billion-dollar question. Frank's fingers kept flying. Let's check the family angle. She has one living relative in the state, a brother, Mikhail Vera, age 24. Frank typed in the new name. A different profile appeared on the screen, this one from a corporate database. Connor's blood ran cold. The photo was of a young, bright-eyed man with the same high cheekbones as his sister. But it was the information below the photo that made him stumble back a step. Name: Mikhail Vera. Position: junior accountant, philanthropic division employer. Brennan Holdings. Connor felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't an external threat. The rot was inside. It was in his house. Mikhail Vera worked in the very division that managed the initial seed funding for Project Nightingale. Frank, Connor said, his voice barely a whisper, pull up everything on Mikhail. Access his work computer, his emails, his internal comms. I want to know what he had for breakfast. Already on it, Frank said, his tone grim. I'm running a deep diagnostic on his network activity, looking for red flags, large file transfers, wiped caches, keyword triggers. For the next hour, the only sounds in the sanctum were the frantic clicking of keys and Connor's ragged breathing. He felt a profound sense of violation. Project Nightingale was sacred. It was his tribute to a mother who died because she couldn't afford the very best care. It was meant to be his legacy, a pure and untainted force for good. The idea that someone was using it, tainting it, filled him with a rage so cold it felt like a physical weight in his chest. I've got something, Frank said, his voice tense. Mikhail's work logs show a pattern. Every few days late at night, he remotely accesses a specific set of encrypted ledgers connected to Nightingale's offshore preliminary investment accounts. He stays in for a few minutes, makes a series of complex transactions, and then logs out. The access logs are wiped almost immediately after he exits, but the system's ghost data shows the access happened. He's good at covering his tracks, but he's not good enough. What kind of transactions? They look like standard expense allocations on the surface, but the amounts, they're being sliced off in small, irregular increments. Pennies on the dollar, but there are thousands of these microtransactions. They're being funneled through a dozen shell corporations before ending up in a single, consolidated account. Whose account? Connor demanded. Frank was silent for a moment. He typed another string of commands. A wire transfer schematic appeared on the screen, a complex web of digital pathways. The final destination account is in the Cayman Islands. It's heavily firewalled. It'll take me time to crack it. But the shell corporations, they have a digital signature, a routing code I've seen before. Where? Frank turned in his chair to face Connor, his expression grim. In the corporate slush fund accounts used for executive discretionary spending, the accounts that are managed directly by the COO's office. The world tilted on its axis. Gavin Reed. His best man at a wedding that had long since failed. The man he'd celebrated his first million with. The man who sat on the board of Project Nightingale, who had wept with Connor when they'd first outlined its mission. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. No, Connor said, shaking his head. Not Gavin. There's another explanation. Connor, Frank said softly, his voice full of a terrible certainty. The routing codes are a perfect match. And there's more. Mikhail Vera's last performance review, he was flagged for exceptional talent and promoted to the philanthropic division 3 months ago. The promotion was personally signed off on by Gavin Reed. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Gavin had found a smart, hungry kid in the accounting pool. a kid with a vulnerable sister working two jobs to make ends meet. He'd promoted him, given him access, and then, what? Trapped him, blackmailed him, forced him to become the architect of the theft? Mikhail wasn't the mastermind. He was the tool, and his sister, Leora, was the one who was brave enough, or desperate enough, to fight back. Her note wasn't just a warning, it was a cry for help. "They know who you are," the note said. Gavin knew he was at the restaurant. How? Had he been followed? Was his security compromised? Or was it just a lucky guess, a trap set for an employee who might talk? "Find her, Frank," Connor ordered, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Find Leora Vera. Use every asset we have, but be discreet. No sirens, no uniforms. She's not a criminal. She's a witness. And right now, she's the only person who can tell me exactly how deep this betrayal goes. Find her before they do." The address in Pilsen led them to a weathered brick 3-flat, sandwiched between a vibrant mural of Cesar Chavez and a bodega blaring cheerful mariachi music. It was a world away from Connor's sterile Lake Forest estate. This was a place of life, of community, of struggle, a place where a woman like Leora Vera could easily disappear. Frank had worked through the night. His team of ghosts, former intelligence and law enforcement operatives on his private payroll, had been activated. They hadn't found Leora. Her apartment was empty. Her phone was off. She hadn't shown up for her morning shift at the diner. She had vanished. "She's scared, Connor. She made a bold move, and now she's gone to ground," Frank said, his voice a low grumble through Connor's secure earpiece. They were parked a block away in a nondescript sedan that was packed with more surveillance technology than a spy plane. "She thinks I'm part of it," Connor realized with a jolt. "She doesn't know who to trust. She warned me, but she has no idea if I'm the victim or one of the villains." The thought twisted a knife in his gut. This woman had risked everything to get a message to him, and in her eyes he was likely indistinguishable from the very people who were threatening her. "What about the brother?" Connor asked. "Mikhail went to work this morning. My team has eyes on him. He looks like a wreck. Jumpy, pale. He's a kid and way over his head," Frank reported. "We can't approach him. If he's being watched, it'll tip them off that we're onto them. We need Leora." Connor's frustration mounted. He was a man who could move markets with a single phone call, but he was powerless to find one waitress in the city he owned. He was used to being in control, to manipulating the board, not staring at a brick wall. "Think, Frank. Where would she go? She has no money, no family other than the brother she's trying to protect. She can't go to the cops. Who would she turn to?" "Someone from her past," Frank mused. "Someone off the grid. Let me dig deeper into her history. There's always a thread." While Frank's digital ghosts scoured old yearbooks, social media footprints, and public records, Connor watched the building. He saw families coming and going, heard the laughter of children playing on the sidewalk. This was Leora's world, a world so fundamentally different from his own, yet their fates were now inextricably linked. He felt a strange sense of responsibility for her, a fierce, protective instinct that went beyond her role as a witness. Hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Connor's phone buzzed. It was Frank. "I've got a possible thread. Her father, before he passed away, was a member of the St. Nicholas Orthodox Cathedral over in Ukrainian Village. The Vera family were active members when the kids were younger. The priest there, a Father Dmitri, runs a number of outreach programs, soup kitchens, temporary shelters. He's old school, a pillar of the community." "A church," Connor breathed. "A sanctuary. It's perfect. No one would look for her there." "It's a long shot, but it's the only one we've got," Frank said. "I'm sending a discreet unit to observe the place. But Connor, if she's there, you can't go in looking like you. And I can't be the one to make contact. It has to be someone non-threatening, someone she might trust." A plan began to form in Connor's mind, born of desperation and a newfound understanding of the world Leora inhabited. "I know," Connor said. "Frank, get me a change of clothes, something like I was wearing last night, but even more worn. And I need a car, the oldest, most beaten-up junker you can find in the impound lot." and I need $100 in worn-out bills. What are you planning, Connor? Frank asked, a note of concern in his voice. I'm not going as Connor Brennan, CEO. I'm not even going as Cal, the construction worker. I'm going as someone she'll understand. Someone who's reached the end of his rope. Someone looking for a little charity. An hour later, Connor was transformed. The expensive disguised Cal clothes were gone, replaced by a threadbare hoodie, faded jeans with a hole in the knee, and boots that were genuinely falling apart. Frank had even given him a day-old paper cup with a few coins in it. He looked like just another piece of human collateral damage, another soul seeking refuge in the shadow of a steeple. He drove the rusted-out Ford Escort himself, its engine complaining with every gear shift. The St. Nicholas Cathedral was a beautiful, imposing building with golden onion domes that reached for the night sky. A simple sign near a side door pointed to the basement. St. Nicholas Community Supper. All are welcome. Taking a deep breath, Connor got out of the car, hunching his shoulders and affecting a limp. He joined a small, shuffling line of men and women, their faces etched with the hardships of the street. He kept his head down, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement. He was no longer acting. For the first time, he felt a sliver of the desperation that must be a constant companion for so many. The basement was warm and smelled of potato soup and bleach. It was a clean, organized space filled with long tables. Volunteers served food with kind smiles. And standing behind the serving line, ladling soup into a bowl, was Leora Vera. She looked even more tired than she had at the restaurant. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a plain apron over a t-shirt. But here, in this place of charity, the hard, professional mask was gone. He saw a flicker of warmth in her eyes as she spoke to an elderly woman, a gentleness he hadn't seen before. Connor got in her line, his heart pounding. This was the most important negotiation of his life, and he had nothing to offer but the truth, wrapped in a lie. He shuffled forward, his turn finally coming. He pushed his tray forward without looking up. "Soup, please," he mumbled, his voice raspy. Leora picked up the ladle. "Of course," she said softly. As she poured the soup, her eyes fell on his hands, the hands of Cal, with their deliberately calloused knuckles and dirt-caked fingernails. She paused. Her gaze slowly traveled up his arms to his face, which he kept partially obscured by the hoodie. Her breath caught. He saw a flicker of recognition. Then a wave of pure terror washed over her face. Her knuckles went white as she gripped the ladle. She thought one of them had found her. He had to act fast. He looked up just enough to meet her eyes. He kept his voice low, a desperate whisper meant only for her. "Nightingale," he breathed. "You were right. It's a lie. My name is Connor Brennan, and I need your help." Leora's eyes widened. The ladle slipped from her fingers, clattering into the stainless steel soup pot with a loud clang that echoed through the quiet basement. Everyone turned to look, and in that moment of frozen, suspended time, Connor knew he had either just saved both their lives or condemned them completely. For a heart-stopping second, Leora's face was a mask of indecision, fear warred with a desperate glimmer of hope. The priest, a stout man with a kind, weathered face and a magnificent gray beard, came over immediately. "Leora, my child, are you all right?" Father Dimitri asked, his voice a soothing balm. Leora blinked, snapping out of her trance. She looked from Connor's disguised face to the concerned priest. With a composure that astounded Connor, she forced a shaky smile. "I'm fine, Father. I'm so sorry. My hand just slipped. I think I just need a moment of air." "Of course," the priest said, his eyes full of concern. He nodded to another volunteer to take her place. Leora untied her apron, her hands trembling, and walked toward a back door marked private. Before she pushed it open, she shot a quick, sharp glance at Connor, a clear instruction. Connor waited, his nerves screaming. He took his tray of soup and sat at the most secluded corner of the room, his back to the wall. He forced himself to eat, the simple, hot soup a small comfort in the churning sea of his anxiety. Every new person who entered the basement sent a jolt of paranoia through him. Was it one of Gavin's men? Was the church being watched? 5 minutes later, a young boy, no older than 12, approached his table. "Mr. Father Dimitri wants to see you. Says you might need some help with, finding work." It was a clumsy but effective excuse. Connor nodded, left his half-eaten soup, and followed the boy. He was led not to the priest's office, but through the kitchen and up a narrow flight of stairs into a small Spartan room. It looked like a study, filled with books on theology and history. A single bare bulb illuminated the room. Leora was standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Father Dmitri stood near the door, his expression unreadable. "Leave us," Leora said to the priest, her voice quiet but firm. The priest looked at Connor, then at her, and with a small nod of trust, he closed the door, leaving them alone. The silence was thick with tension. "How did you find me?" Leora asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My security head is the best in the world," Connor answered honestly, deciding that lies were a luxury he could no longer afford. "We figured you'd seek sanctuary." "Your security?" she scoffed, a bitter edge to her voice. "How do I know you're not one of them? How do I know this isn't a trap? That you didn't just come here to silence me for good?" Connor took a step closer. "Because I'm the one you warned. Because Nightingale is my mother's legacy, and because your brother, Mikhail, works for me." Her face crumpled at the mention of her brother's name. The tough facade she had maintained cracked, revealing the terrified young woman beneath. "Mikhail, what have they done to him?" "He's the one they're using to move the money," Connor said gently. "I believe he's being forced, blackmailed. You need to tell me everything, Leora, from the beginning." And so the story poured out of her. It started 2 months ago. Mikhail, brilliant and ambitious, had been ecstatic about his promotion. He'd seen it as his way to finally give his sister a better life, to let her quit one of her jobs. But a few weeks in, he discovered the discrepancies. Tiny, almost invisible transfers. He thought it was a system glitch and reported it to his direct supervisor. The very next evening, 2 men had been waiting for him in the alley behind their apartment. One of them, a well-dressed man who never gave his name, had laid it all out. They knew he'd found the vulnerability. They explained that this was an off-the-books executive program, sanctioned from the very top. If he kept quiet and did exactly as he was told, his career would flourish. If he spoke a word of it to anyone, they would not only ruin him professionally but also ensure that his sister, the hard-working waitress, would have a tragic accident. The man in the suit, "It was Gavin Reed," Connor supplied, his voice hard as granite. Leora nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Mikhail didn't know his name then, but he saw him on the company website later, the COO. My brother was trapped. He was terrified. They made him the architect of the whole thing, forcing him to make the transfers, to cover the tracks. They used his talent to perfect their crime. He was dying inside, Connor. Every day a piece of him was just gone. Why warn me? Why take that risk? "Because last week it got worse," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Mikhail overheard a call. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. It was Gavin, and he was angry. He said something about Brennan getting suspicious and nosing around where he doesn't belong. He said that if you got too close, they would have to accelerate the timeline and liquidate the asset. Mikhail realized they weren't just talking about money anymore. He thought they were talking about you. He came home in a panic. He was convinced they were going to try to kill you. The puzzle pieces slid into place. His questions, his subtle probes at board meetings had been noticed. Gavin was getting nervous. "We couldn't go to the police," Leora continued, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Who would believe a junior accountant and a waitress against the COO of Brennan Holdings? They would have crushed us. So we came up with a desperate plan. I found out you were a creature of habit, that you sometimes visited your own properties unannounced. I took the job at the Gilded Steer a month ago, hoping, praying, that you might come in. It was a 1 in a million shot. When you walked in last night, disguised, I almost fainted. I recognized you from a company charity gala photo Mikhail had shown me. The eyes, you can't disguise your eyes." Her courage was staggering. She had placed herself in the lion's den, armed with nothing but a desperate hope. "The note," Connor said. "How did you know they knew I was there? When you ordered the Emperor's Cut, my manager, Jeffrey, made a call. I heard him in the back office. He was talking to someone, laughing. He said, 'You won't believe it. The package is here, and he's putting on quite a show. He was reporting your presence to someone. That's when I knew the whole restaurant could be compromised. I had to warn you and get out. Jeffrey, the sniveling maitre d'. Of course. Gavin had eyes and ears everywhere. Leora, I need your help, Connor said, his tone resolute. More than that, I need Mikhail's help. I can't go to the feds yet. Gavin is too powerful, too connected. They'd bury the evidence and destroy you both in the process. I need irrefutable proof. I need to catch him in the act. What are you asking? She asked, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. I'm asking your brother to be the bait, Connor said grimly. We need to set a trap. We need to get Gavin on tape, admitting to the fraud, making the threats. It's the only way to take him down and guarantee your safety. You're asking him to walk back into the fire, she whispered, shaking her head. He's just a boy. He's not a spy. And you're not a secret agent, but you passed a note that might save my company and my life, Connor countered, his gaze intense. He is stronger than you think, and he won't be alone. My team will be with him every step of the way. Frank will make sure he's safe. He saw the conflict raging within her, the fierce, protective love for her brother versus the cold, hard logic of their situation. There was no other way out. They couldn't run forever. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. Her eyes were hard, no longer the eyes of a victim, but of a fighter. I'll talk to him, she said. I will call him. We'll do it. But you make me a promise, Mr. Brennan. You promise me that you will protect my brother. You promise me that when this is over, Gavin Reed will pay for what he did to our family. You have my word, Connor said, meeting her gaze. He won't just pay. He'll be erased. The next 24 hours were a blur of high-stakes planning. The Sanctum, Connor's secure command center, became the war room. Leora, no longer a waitress but a key strategist, sat beside Frank, her insights into her brother's psyche proving invaluable. Father Dmitri had arranged for her to stay in a secure room at the rectory, under the watch of one of Frank's most trusted female operatives. Mikhail was brought in under the guise of an urgent, late-night project meeting. The young accountant was a bundle of raw nerves, his face pale and clammy. When he saw his sister sitting beside the formidable Connor Brennan, he nearly collapsed with a mixture of terror and relief. Leora, what is this? What's happening? He stammered. Leora stood and embraced him. It's okay, Misha, she whispered in Russian, a term of endearment from their childhood. It's going to be okay. We're fighting back. Connor and Frank laid out the plan. It was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Mikhail would contact Gavin Reed. He would claim that he'd made a mistake, a critical error in the last transfer that could potentially expose the entire scheme during an upcoming routine audit. He would tell Gavin that he had a solution, a way to patch the digital hole, but it was complex and couldn't be explained over the phone. He would insist on an in-person meeting, somewhere private, to walk Gavin through the fix. He'll never agree, Mikhail said, shaking his head. He never meets with me. He uses an intermediary, a man named Donovan. Describe him, Frank said, leaning forward. Big guy, ex-military, I think. Cold eyes. He has a scar that runs through his left eyebrow. He's the one who visited me. Frank's fingers flew across the keyboard. He pulled up a series of photos. This man? Mikhail flinched. The picture was of a hard-faced man with a noticeable scar. That's him. That's Donovan. Patrick Donnie Donovan, Frank read from the screen. Dishonorable discharge, Army Rangers. Hired muscle for corporate clients who like to operate in the gray. He's dangerous, but he's a subordinate. He follows orders. Gavin is arrogant. He thinks you're a scared little kid he owns. If you sound panicked enough, if you convince him the risk of exposure is real, and only you can fix it, his pride won't let him send a proxy. He'll want to oversee it himself. He'll want to look you in the eye. The bait was Project Nightingale's integrity. The hook was Gavin's own ego. The location for the meeting was crucial. It had to be a place Gavin controlled, to make him feel secure, but one that Frank's team could rig beforehand. They chose a sub-level conference room at the Brennan Holdings Tower, a room rarely used, designated for archival storage. It was perfect, isolated, soundproofed, and accessible via service elevators. Over the next few hours, Frank's team, disguised as late-night maintenance and IT crews, swarmed the conference room. They installed microscopic cameras in the smoke detectors and microphones in the light fixtures. Mikhail was fitted with a wire, a tiny device woven into the button of his shirt. "He'll have a sweeper," Connor warned. "They'll check for bugs." "The gear we're using is next-gen military spec," Frank assured him. "It broadcasts on a frequency that standard commercial sweepers can't detect. To them, this room will be cleaner than a hospital ward." "Mikhail, the button on your shirt is also a panic alarm. You press and hold it for 3 seconds, my team will breach that door in less than 10. You understand?" Mikhail nodded, his throat tight. The most difficult part was coaching Mikhail for the phone call. Connor played the role of Gavin, peppering the young accountant with aggressive, condescending questions, trying to break him. Leora was his rock, holding his hand, whispering encouragement, reminding him of what was at stake, their future, their freedom. Finally, it was time. From a secure line in the sanctum, Mikhail dialed Gavin's private number. They all listened, hearts in their throats, as the call went through. "Reed," Gavin's smooth, confident voice answered. "Mr. Reed, it's Mikhail Vera. I'm so sorry to call you this late, sir, but there's a problem, a big one." Mikhail's voice was a perfect blend of manufactured panic and genuine fear. He followed the script flawlessly, explaining the fabricated data anomaly. There was a long, cold pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of problem, Mikhail?" "It's the routing algorithm for the last transfer batch, sir. There's a recursive echo in the code. It's traceable. The quarterly audit is next week. If they run a deep diagnostic, they'll find it. They'll find everything." "Can you fix it?" Gavin's voice was sharp, all pretense of charm gone. "I think so, but it's not a simple patch. I have to rebuild the encryption key from a root level. I can't do it remotely, and I can't explain it over the phone. I need to show you, sir, in person." Another pause. Connor held his breath. This was the moment of truth. "Fine," Gavin finally snapped. "My office is being painted. Meet me in the sub-level conference room, C3, 1 hour, and you come alone. Understood?" "Yes, sir, alone." "Thank you, sir." Mikhail hung up, slumping into his chair, drenched in sweat. He had done it. The trap was set. Leora rushed to his side, hugging him tightly. "You were so brave, Misha." Frank turned to Connor. "He's bringing Donovan. He always does." Connor's jaw was set. "I know. Your team is on standby for the breach." "What about you?" Frank asked. "Where will you be?" "I'm not watching this on a screen," Connor said, his eyes blazing with cold fury. "Gavin is my mess to clean up. I'll be in the observation room next door. When you breach, I'm going in with you." It was a breach of every security protocol, but Frank saw the look on Connor's face and knew there was no arguing. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. This was about staring betrayal in the face and watching it break. The sub-level conference room was cold, the air stale with the scent of old paper and dust. Mikhail sat alone at the long, polished table, a laptop open in front of him. On the screen was a meaningless cascade of code he and Frank's team had fabricated. The data anomaly. Every quiet hum of the building's HVAC system sounded like a roar in his ears. In the adjacent observation room, a converted storage closet, Connor, Frank, and a tactical team leader watched a bank of monitors. They saw Mikhail from 4 different angles, his pale, tense face reflected in the dark screen of his laptop. They heard the frantic, shallow rhythm of his breathing through the hidden microphones. "He's sweating," Connor observed, his own hands clenched into fists. "He'll be fine," Frank said, though his eyes never left the monitors. "He just has to hold on for a few more minutes." On screen, the elevator dinged. The doors to the conference room swung open. Gavin Reed strode in, looking impeccable in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated an aura of absolute power and control. Behind him was Donovan, a hulking presence with dead eyes and a noticeable bulge under his jacket. Donovan immediately pulled out a small electronic device and swept the room, running it over the walls, the table, even Mikhail himself. In the observation room, the team held its breath. "It's clean," Donovan grunted, giving Gavin a nod. Gavin smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "See, Mikhail, a little paranoia is healthy. Now show me this catastrophic error you've been squealing about. Mikhail, his hands shaking visibly, began to explain the fake lines of code. His voice was unsteady, but he stuck to the script. Connor felt a surge of admiration for the young man's courage. He was holding his own in a room with two sharks. Gavin listened, feigning interest, but his eyes were cold and dismissive. I pay you to be brilliant, Mikhail, not to make clumsy mistakes. Fix it, now. I am, sir, Mikhail said, typing furiously. I just need to reroute the primary encryption key through a ghost server. To do that, I need the final authorization code, the one you hold. This was the linchpin of the plan. They needed Gavin to verbally state the code, a unique alphanumeric sequence that would directly link him to the Cayman Islands account. Gavin hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Why do you need it now? You've never needed it for a fix before. Because this isn't a fix, it's a rebuild, Mikhail improvised, his mind racing. The old key is compromised. We need a new one, and the system requires the master code to authorize that level of change. It's a failsafe. Gavin stared at Mikhail, a long, unnerving silence stretching through the room. Donovan shifted his weight, placing a hand casually inside his jacket. You're lying, Gavin said softly. The air in the observation room turned to ice. What? Mikhail stammered. There's no data anomaly, Gavin said, stepping closer to the table, his voice dripping with venom. I had my own tech guys run a remote diagnostic the second you hung up the phone. The system is perfectly clean. So why don't you tell me what this is really about, Mikhail? Who are you talking to? Mikhail's face went white. The trap had turned on them. I don't know what you're talking about, he whispered. Don't you? Gavin snarled. He nodded to Donovan, who moved with startling speed. He grabbed Mikhail, yanking him out of the chair and slamming him against the wall. The laptop crashed to the floor. Let's try this again, Gavin said, his voice dangerously calm as Donovan held the terrified accountant in place. Are you talking to the feds? Or did you get brave and go to Brennan himself? Go! Connor roared in the observation room. Frank was already speaking into his wristcom. Breach, breach, breach. Before the tactical team could move, Donovan's practiced hands were already patting Mikhail down. His fingers found the small lump on his shirt. He's wearing a wire. Gavin's face contorted in a mask of pure fury. You little rat! He backhanded Mikhail across the face, a sharp crack echoing through the microphones. The conference room doors exploded inwards. Frank's team, clad in black tactical gear, swarmed the room. Hands up! Get on the ground! Donovan reacted on pure instinct, shoving Mikhail towards Gavin and drawing his weapon. But he was outmatched. In seconds, he was disarmed and forced to his knees. Gavin, however, didn't even flinch. He stood there watching the chaos with an eerie calm as his world crumbled around him. He saw Frank, and then he saw Connor step through the splintered doorway. The sight of his old friend, his face a thunderous mask of betrayal, finally broke Gavin's composure. A look of shock, followed by pure, unadulterated hatred, crossed his features. You, Gavin spat, his voice laced with poison, the man of the people, hiding in the shadows with your little army. It's over, Gav, Connor said, his voice raw with pain and disgust. We have everything. The wire, the cameras, the financial trail, everything. Why? Connor demanded, stepping over to him, the tactical team forming a perimeter. Why would you do this? Project Nightingale? My mother's memory. Gavin laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your mother's memory? Don't you dare. You were always St. Connor, weren't you? The boy genius, the golden child. Everything you touched turned to gold. I was always the sidekick, the friend, the COO, standing in your damn shadow for 20 years. This company was built on my back as much as yours. I trusted you, Connor choked out. You were my brother. And I was your servant, Gavin roared, his face turning purple. Project Nightingale was the last straw, your legacy, another monument to the great Connor Brennan. I decided it was time I built my own legacy, one that you would pay for. The confession, raw and filled with years of festering resentment, hung in the air. It was all on tape. It was over. As the team cuffed him, Gavin's eyes full of venom found Mikhail, who was being helped to his feet by Leora, who had rushed in behind Connor. You and your sister, Gavin hissed at him. You should have taken the money and kept your mouth shut. I'll be out in a year, and when I am, I will find you. Before anyone could react, Connor crossed the space in 2 strides. He didn't punch Gavin. He did something worse. He looked him dead in the eye, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You will never see the light of day again, Connor said, his voice void of all emotion. And if you ever so much as breathe their names again, I will personally spend every last dollar I have to ensure that the only world you know for the rest of your miserable life is the inside of a concrete box. You are erased, Gavin. Do you understand me? You no longer exist. Gavin stared back, and for the first time, Connor saw fear in his old friend's eyes. The threat of prison was one thing. The threat of total, utter annihilation from a man with limitless resources was another. He had lost, and he knew it. The aftermath was a controlled earthquake. The story broke, but Connor's PR team, armed with the full truth and irrefutable evidence, spun it not as a corporate scandal, but as a story of integrity. Brennan Holdings cleans house, exposes high-level fraud. The headlines read, Gavin Reed and his network of accomplices, including the Maitre d' Jeffrey and the enforcer Donovan, were indicted on federal charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They faced decades in prison. The name Gavin Reed, once a titan of industry, became a footnote, a cautionary tale. A week later, Connor stood in his office on the top floor of the Brennan Holdings Tower. The city of Chicago sprawled out below him, a kingdom he had nearly lost from within. The rot had been cut out, but the wound remained. The betrayal of a man he considered a brother had changed him, leaving him more guarded, but also, strangely, more clear-sighted. There was a soft knock on his door. Come in. Leora and Mikhail Vera entered. They looked different. The fear that had been their constant companion was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. Mikhail's bruised cheek was healing, and he stood taller. Leora's eyes, though still carrying the memory of their ordeal, were no longer tired. They were bright, sharp, and focused. Thank you for seeing us, Mr. Brennan, Mikhail said, his voice steady. Connor, please, he corrected him, and I should be thanking you. Both of you. He gestured for them to sit, but he remained standing, looking out the window. Gavin's assets have been frozen. The courts have already begun the process of seizing the stolen funds. Every last penny is being returned to the Nightingale Foundation. He turned to face them. Project Nightingale is being restructured. I'm dissolving the old board. I'm starting over with a new mandate of absolute transparency. And I need a new director of finance for the foundation. Someone with unimpeachable integrity, a brilliant mind for numbers, and a personal investment in making sure no one ever corrupts its mission again. He looked directly at Mikhail. The job is yours, Mikhail, if you want it. It comes with a significant salary increase, a full scholarship to complete your master's degree, and my complete trust. Mikhail was speechless. He looked at his sister, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning joy. I don't know what to say. Yes. Of course, yes. Thank you, Connor. You earned it, Connor said with a small smile. Then he turned his attention to Leora. And as for you, Leora, he said, his tone softening, I know I can never fully repay you for the risk you took, but I'd like to try. I'm establishing a new grant program within the foundation. It's designed to provide full scholarships and living stipends for exceptional individuals who want to pursue business management and administration, but lack the means. The first scholarship is yours. Leora's jaw dropped. A scholarship? For me? You have a mind for strategy and a composure under pressure I've rarely seen, Connor continued. You ran a counterintelligence operation from the floor of a steakhouse in a church basement. I think you'll do just fine at Wharton. And when you graduate, there will be a senior management position waiting for you, right here, not at the restaurant, at headquarters. I need people I can trust, people who aren't afraid to slip me a note when they see something wrong. Tears streamed down Leora's face, but this time, they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. For the first time in her life, the future was not a mountain to be climbed, but an open horizon. After they left, their lives forever changed. Connor remained by the window. He thought about the man who had walked into the Gilded Steer, a billionaire pretending to be broken. He had gone looking for corporate decay, but had found human courage instead. He had learned that the true strength of his empire wasn't in its stock price or its assets, but in the unseen, unheard people who kept it running. The ones who, like Leora, saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it ought to be. He had set out to test the integrity of his staff and had ended up having his entire world saved by a waitress. The note on the napkin was not the end of a story of betrayal, but the beginning of a new one, a story of trust, resilience, and a new foundation, built not on steel and glass, but on the unbreakable courage of two ordinary people who chose to do an extraordinary thing. This story proves that true courage isn't measured in dollars, but in conviction. Connor Brennan had a corporate empire, yet it was a waitress, Leora Vera, whose small, brave act of defiance saved his entire legacy from a devastating web of lies. It's a powerful reminder that heroes are often found in the most unexpected places, in the quiet people who see something wrong and dare to speak the truth. If you were moved by this story of courage and consequence, please give this video a thumbs up and share it. For more incredible dramas that reveal the heroes hidden in plain sight, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for listening.